Once he stood as a pillar of hope, Saruman the White, the chief of the Istari, the great leader of the White Council. To the eyes of elves, dwarves, and men alike, he was wisdom made flesh, the shining bulwark against the gathering storm of Mordor. Yet beneath his radiant robes, a different story was being written, one of slow, unseen decay. In the hidden hours, away from the eyes of those who trusted him, Saruman's heart turned, grain by grain, toward ambition. What began as a thirst for understanding, to master the ways of the enemy, so they might be used against him, subtly shifted. Curiosity hardened into obsession. Knowledge bent into lust for dominion. And still no one saw, not Gandalf, not Elrond, not Galadriel. Saruman wove his own mask so skillfully that even the wise mistook the hollow gleam of virtue for true light. Every council he presided over, every word he spoke, was laced with the slow, almost imperceptible erosion of loyalty. Darkness does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Saruman's betrayal was not a violent shattering. It was a long, patient rot, a withering of the spirit cloaked in grandeur. And by the time suspicion stirred in the hearts of the vigilant, the White Wizard had already crossed the threshold. His allegiance, once pure, had turned to ash. He no longer fought to destroy Sauron. He fought to replace him. And so, beneath the banners of hope, treason took root, silent, relentless, and unseen, until it was too late. Across the trembling lands of Middle-earth, a shadow began to rise, slow, poisonous, inevitable. Whispers of dread drifted from the darkened heart of Mirkwood, carried on winds that made even the bravest shudder. Sauron, long thought vanquished, was stirring once more. And in answer to this growing terror, the wise and mighty of the world came together. Thus was born the White Council, a gathering of power not seen since the Elder Days. Elrond of Rivendell, Galadriel of Lothlorien, certain of the Havens, lord and guardians whose names carried the weight of ages. Among them stood Gandalf the Grey, steadfast and far-seeing, and Saruman the White, resplendent and commanding, a beacon that all others turned to. With heavy hearts and grim resolve, they pledged themselves to resist the shadow's return, to stand firm where kingdoms might fall. But from the very first, a subtle flaw marred their unity. For though they moved as one body, a single voice held more sway than any other, Saruman's. His words, gilded with learning and authority, shaped their course. His assurances soothed their fears. And none suspected that behind the polished veneer of his counsel, another ambition brewed, hidden and hungry. The White Council stood proudly against the darkness. Yet even in its creation, the seeds of ruin were sown. Their fortress of unity was built upon a foundation already crumbling from within, though none could yet hear the first faint crack. As the council set its gaze outward to battle the enemy that had risen again in the east, they failed to see the far more insidious enemy rising quietly among their own ranks, cloaked in white, crowned in wisdom, and smiling with treacherous grace. In the wind-swept vale beneath the towering peaks of the Misty Mountains, the fortress of Isengard stood silent, proud, ancient, and abandoned. Once a stronghold of Gondor's might, it had fallen into disrepair, left vulnerable in a world too distracted by its own unraveling. Yet to Saruman, it was not a relic, it was an opportunity. With soft words and polished promises, he approached the rulers of men. To the weary steward of Gondor and the trusting king of Rohan, Saruman offered aid, wisdom, strength. They, who still clung to the memory of his once unquestioned virtue, saw no danger. They saw salvation. And so, without suspicion, they placed Orthanc, the dark tower at Isengard's heart, into his keeping. It was a decision made in hope, and it sowed the seeds of disaster. Behind the high, stone walls, away from prying eyes, Saruman set about fortifying his newfound domain. He was no mere steward. He was master now, his mind, already turning toward darker ambitions, saw in Isengard not just a fortress, but a throne. It was there, within the iron bones of Orthanc, that Saruman's dreams of dominion began to fester and grow. From the outside, he remained the White Wizard, ally of men, guardian of the West. But within, the walls whispered with secret labors. Forges that would one day birth monsters, chambers where power was hoarded like treasure, schemes spun like webs in the darkness. When the world looked upon Isengard, they saw security. Saruman saw a kingdom yet to be born, and none realized, not yet, that a new and terrible power was gathering, hidden in the hollow of the mountains, where once only honor had dwelt. For a time, the world dared to believe it was safe. The White Council moved like a shield against the gathering dark, and Saruman's voice, rich and commanding, lulled even the wary into uneasy peace. Yet not all were fully at ease. In the quiet corners of his mind, Gandalf the Grey, the ever-watchful pilgrim, began to feel a chill that words could not explain. There was something wrong, like the faint scent of smoke before a wildfire, like the uneasy silence before a storm. A tension wound tighter and tighter around the wizard's heart. Saruman's counsel was still gilded with learning, his eyes still bright with feigned purpose. But to Gandalf, the brilliance now seemed hollow, beneath the polished rhetoric and grand strategies. Gandalf sensed a hesitation, a subtle twisting of motives, as if Saruman sought to delay, to manipulate, rather than to act. When Gandalf pressed for bold action against the growing shadow at Dol Guldur, Saruman's rebuttals rang too smooth, too rehearsed. And though no proof could be seized, though no single word betrayed him, the unease grew. Gandalf, who loved truth and hated falsehood, felt it gnawing at him. The knowledge that the council's chief architect might be building something far different than what he claimed. Still, doubt was a heavy burden to carry alone. Around him, the wise remained spellbound by Saruman's reputation, and Gandalf, bound by duty and loyalty, hesitated to speak what his heart already feared. That treachery was not coming from the distant east alone. It was festering right at the heart of their defense. In the gilded halls of council and power, Gandalf alone began to listen for the whispers in the dark, and he did not like what he heard. While the great and wise clung to Saruman's every word, believing his wisdom to be their surest shield, there was one among them who did not fall under the White Wizard spell. A man cloaked in many names, moving like a shadow between kingdoms. Thorngill, they called him then. But he was Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir to a broken throne and bearer of ancient foresight. In the courts of Rohan and Gondor, as Thorngill, he watched and listened, and in the glittering web of Saruman's assurances, he sensed a dangerous tremor. Others saw only the robe of white, the staff of power, the voice of reason. Aragorn, with eyes sharpened by bloodlines steeped in destiny and grief, saw something far more sinister, a hunger, a growing lust for dominion wrapped in hollow righteousness. Quietly, without fanfare, he whispered warning to Steward Ithilien II. Trust not Saruman. Place your faith instead in Gandalf the Grey, the pilgrim cloaked in humility and hope. Few heeded his counsel. How could they? The world itself seemed to stand in awe of Saruman's might. But Aragorn's heart was not swayed by grand titles or honeyed words. His instincts, woven deep with the foresight of his kin, whispered that a shadow was already blooming within Isengard. It was a dangerous knowledge to carry, and a lonely one. For who among the wise would listen to a nameless captain when the voice of the mighty thundered louder? Yet still he held to his warning. A solitary flame against the coming dark. In the great, slow tragedy unfolding across Middle-earth, Aragorn, Thorngill, was the first to glimpse the fault lines beneath the shimmering mask. And when the world would finally awaken to Saruman's betrayal, Aragorn's warning would echo, grim and vindicated, across a land already beginning to burn. The gift of foresight does not come without its burdens. It is a heavy thing, a weight upon the soul, a curse and a blessing twined together. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, bore that gift, not with arrogance, but with a quiet, solemn grace. In his blood ran the wisdom of countless generations, the sharpened sight of the Dunedain, the whispers of ancient prophecies long forgotten by lesser men. Long before Saruman's treachery erupted into open ruin, Aragorn felt it stirring like a sickness beneath the skin of the world. It was not proof he carried, no scroll, no confession, no act of treason to unveil, but something deeper, something far older, the gnawing certainty that the world's shining guardian was, in truth, its hidden peril. Such knowledge is a lonely thing. It isolates even among allies. Yet Aragorn, cloaked in his many names and bearing the humility of a true king, kept his vigil. He watched, and he waited. He advised Steward Ecthelion with a heart heavy with knowledge he could not fully explain, to trust Gandalf the Grey, humble though he seemed, and to look with suspicion upon the polished grandeur of Saruman. But in those days, who would listen? Saruman's voice rang louder. His counsel glimmered brighter. Against such a tide, Aragorn's warnings were like stones thrown into a roaring river, swallowed, dismissed, forgotten. And yet, he did not waver. His foresight, wrought in the blood of his ancestors and tempered by the quiet strength of his spirit, anchored him. He knew that darkness often wore the fairest faces. He knew the storm was coming. Even as others feasted, planned, and dreamed of peace, Aragorn remained restless, a lone sentinel standing against a future only he seemed able to see. For years, Saruman wore his mask with masterful precision. The world saw only the white wizard, noble, commanding, untouchable. But all masks crack under the weight of ambition, and Saruman's could not hold forever. In the secret depths of Isengard, beyond the knowledge of friend and foe alike, he labored, not in defense of Middle-earth, but in preparation for conquest. The forges of Orthanc blazed alive, hammering out weapons of war. Beneath the shadow of the tower, foul experiments gave birth to the Uruk-hai, creatures stronger, crueler, deadlier than any orc before them. No longer merely a student of Sauron's devices, Saruman had become their master. And when at last he deemed the time ripe, he cast aside his pretense of loyalty with the cruelty of a man who had never truly believed in it. Smoke billowed from Isengard. Trees were torn from the earth. Armies surged forth like a flood of black iron. The free peoples of Middle-earth, still reeling from distant threats, were caught utterly unprepared. Rohan, proud and fierce, burned. Villages were razed, and the cries of the innocent filled the wind. The betrayal was absolute, the devastation swift. Those who once named Saruman friend now knew him as foe, but far too late. His treachery was a wound driven deep into the heart of their defenses, a betrayal that fractured their unity at the very hour they could least afford it. The mask had fallen. The hand that once promised salvation now wielded a sword of ruin. And as Middle-earth trembled under the new storm rising from Isengard, only those few who had sensed the rot early, those like Gandalf and Aragorn, could say they were not wholly unprepared for the horror that had come. The storm that Aragorn had long foreseen was no longer a distant threat. It was upon them, savage and merciless. Rohan's fields burned under the tread of Saruman's Uruk-hai and the Proud Riders, once the shield of the West, found themselves overwhelmed by a tide they had never thought to face. Yet amid the smoke and ruin, hope did not die. It rode forth on the wind, bearing the name of a king long hidden, long awaited. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, who had once stood alone against disbelief and complacency, now rose in full glory. The warnings he had whispered in quieter days, the visions that had stirred restless in his blood, were vindicated in fire and blood, no longer cloaked in other names. Aragorn took up his sword and his destiny with unflinching resolve. Where others faltered, he stood. Where fear clutched the hearts of men, he brought courage. He led with a fire that could not be quenched, a flame kindled by years of vigilance and quiet suffering. As the West reeled under Saruman's treachery, Aragorn became the spear point of its resistance. The the living proof that even the darkest betrayals could be met with unyielding light. And so, when the towers of Isengard shook, when the forests marched to war, when Helm's Deep stood defiant against the black tide, Aragorn was there, a figure of hope wrought from prophecy, hardship, and an unbreakable spirit. The world that had once dismissed his warnings now looked to him for salvation. And he did not fail them. In the end, it was not Saruman's cunning nor his monstrous armies that would shape the fate of Middle-earth. It was the steadfast heart of a king who had seen the shadow coming long before it ever touched the land. From the slow corruption of Saruman to the defiant rise of Aragorn, the story of betrayal and foresight weaves a haunting tapestry across Middle-earth. While the world clung to fragile hopes and hollow promises, darkness grew in secret until it could no longer be denied. Yet even amid ruin and despair, a single unwavering light endured. Aragorn's vigilance, born of ancient wisdom and hard-won foresight, stood as a beacon against the coming storm. In the end, it was not treachery that shaped the fate of the world, but the courage of those who dared to see the truth and act upon it.